The sun hadn't even begun to peek over the horizon when I heard the unusual crunch of gravel just outside my kitchen window. I glanced at the clock. 6:15 a.m. Around here, that's usually just the early morning joggers, but this sound was different. It was hurried, intentional. When I peered over the fence, my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was standing there. In the faint glow of the porch light, his weathered face looked more serious than I'd ever seen it, as if he'd been up all night wrestling with a decision. "Don't go to that appointment," he said, his voice low and urgent, skipping the morning pleasantries. "Stay home. For Michael's sake, trust me." I froze, the pruning shears in my hand feeling heavy and cold. "It's just a checkup, Art. Claire set it all up." "I can't explain it any better than that," he cut in, his eyes sharp and direct. "Just promise me you won't set foot out that door today, not for any reason." He leaned closer to the fence, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You'll understand when she calls." Before I could ask another question, he pulled back, shot a nervous glance up and down the empty street as if the shadows themselves were listening, and then quickly retreated back into his house. He left me standing there alone with his chilling warning and the image of my daughter, who was already on her way to pick me up. "My name is Susan Sterling, and I'm a 66-year-old widow living in Portland, Oregon. At 66, you learn to appreciate the little things. You realize that waking up each morning to the mournful cry of a distant train horn isn't a guarantee anymore. It's a fragile gift. I start my days in that quiet, a routine that's become etched into my very bones. The small kitchen is bathed in the silvery gray light of a Portland dawn, and the rich aroma of dark coffee hangs in the air, a familiar, comforting scent. This was my world, predictable, peaceful, and if I'm being honest, a little bit lonely. But this morning, something different had crept into that steady rhythm, a discordant note in the familiar symphony of my life. It was an appointment. Last night, my daughter, Claire, had called. There was a strange urgency in her voice, a tension I'd learned to recognize over the past 2 years, ever since my husband Michael passed away. "You have to go, Mom," she'd practically pleaded. "I've arranged an appointment for you with a holistic health specialist. They have the newest technology." I had to pull a lot of strings to get you a free slot for seniors. She emphasized the word free as if it were a great victory, and maybe for us right now it was. "I just want to make sure you're completely healthy," she finished, her voice softening, as if the words were a confession of her own fears. I stood there in my kitchen, the warm coffee mug in my hands, and let my eyes drift around the house. These weren't just walls and a roof. This was a museum of memories, a testament to the life Michael and I had built together. But now, even these walls seemed to be groaning under an invisible weight. My gaze landed on the old oak table in the corner of the living room, where Michael used to sit and read the paper every morning. Now, it was home to a stack of envelopes, a silent, menacing army of paper. Envelopes with little plastic windows revealing angry red letters, numbers that danced cruelly, hospital bills, past due notices, letters from the insurance company. Every single one was a reminder of Michael's final battle, a war we had lost on every front. We'd lost him, and now we were slowly losing everything that was left. I knew Claire was shouldering it all. She was working 2 jobs, a full-time data analyst position during the day and a part-time barista gig at night. Sometimes, when she'd stop by on weekends, I could see the exhaustion etched deep under her eyes, dark circles that no amount of makeup could hide. Her slender shoulders looked like they were carrying the weight of the world. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She'd become a soldier in an unnamed war, and the enemy was the legacy of debt his illness had left behind. So, when she talked about this appointment, about making sure I was healthy, I understood. In her world of chaos and things she couldn't control, my health was the one thing she could try to manage. She couldn't save her father from the Grim Reaper. Now, she was pouring all her anxiety, all her remaining love, into protecting me. The urgency in her voice wasn't just about concern, it was desperation. She was terrified of facing another costly medical battle. She was terrified of losing the only parent she had left. And me, a mother, how could I refuse such a quiet plea? How could I tell her that the aches in my back every morning weren't just old age, but the weight of my own helplessness watching her struggle? How could I admit that my greatest fear wasn't getting sick, but becoming another burden to her? No, I couldn't. So I'd smiled into the phone, a smile I hoped sounded warm and steady. Of course, sweetheart. I'll go. Thank you for worrying about me. A small sigh of relief on the other end of the line, a brief moment of peace in her storm, and for that alone, I knew I'd made the right choice. I took a sip of coffee, its bitterness seeming to wash away some of the bitterness in my heart. I would go to this appointment. I would let them poke and prod and do whatever they needed to do. I'd be the perfect patient. I wouldn't do it for myself. I'd do it for her. Because sometimes, the only way a mother can fight for her child is to surrender to their love. After finishing my coffee, which left a bitter residue at the bottom of the cup, much like the aftertaste of my own life, I did what I always do when my mind is in turmoil. I went out to the garden. The small garden behind the house wasn't just a patch of dirt. It was my kingdom, my last refuge, a miniature world where I could find order amid the chaos. The early morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth from last night's rain, a raw, cleansing smell that seemed to wash away some of the worries clouding my mind. I walked along the moss-covered stone path, dewdrops clinging to the leaves like tiny diamonds, sparkling in the weak dawn light. I picked up the pruning shears Michael had bought me years ago, their cool, heavy metal seeming to ground my trembling fingers. His heirloom roses were in full, glorious bloom, a deep, velvety red, proud and strong. Each flower was a memory, each thorn a reminder that beauty always comes with a little pain. I carefully snipped off a yellowing leaf, a small, precise action to impose my will on one tiny corner of the universe. At least here, in this quiet kingdom, I was still in control of something. At least here, I could tell the difference between what needed nurturing and what decay needed to be cut away. It was while I was lost in my work that a familiar, yet slightly off, sound broke the silence. The crunch of gravel on the path next door, in the Hendersons' yard. I looked up and saw him, my widowed neighbor, on his daily morning walk, a steadfast ritual he'd kept for years. He and Michael had been the best of friends, the kind of quiet male friendship built on afternoons, spent fixing a lawnmower, Sunday nights watching football, and knowing nods over the weathered wooden fence. Since Michael passed, Mr. Henderson had become a silent, comforting presence. We didn't talk much, but his presence, like an old, steady lighthouse, let me know I wasn't completely alone on my island. Still, he had his odd habits. Sometimes, instead of his morning walk, I'd notice his old pickup truck was gone before sunrise, only to return midday. And sometimes, when he'd wave to me, his eyes seemed to be doing more than just looking at me. They'd scan the street, the other houses, with a quiet intensity I couldn't quite place. I'd told myself it was just the caution of an old man living alone, but there was something deeper in that gaze, a professional sort of observation, hidden behind a neighborly demeanor. "Morning, Susan," he said, his voice as deep and warm as usual. But when I looked closer, I saw his friendly smile didn't reach his eyes today. There was a worry hidden behind his reading glasses, a dark cloud obscuring his usual peace. His shoulders seemed a little more slumped, and his easy gait had a hint of hesitation. He didn't keep walking. He stopped and came closer to the fence, where the ivy had woven itself together like clasped fingers, forming a fragile border between our two worlds. "You heading out anywhere today?" I smiled, a reflex for those of us used to hiding our true feelings. "Oh yes," I chirped, trying to make my voice sound light and breezy. "Claire made me an appointment for a checkup downtown. She worries, you know how it is." Mr. Henderson's expression hardened. My forced cheerfulness seemed to evaporate under his gaze. It was like a thin fog pierced by a sunbeam. He glanced quickly up and down the empty street, a cautious move that made me instinctively hold my breath. Then he lowered his voice, an urgent whisper, just loud enough to carry over the wooden fence to my ears. "Susan, listen to me. Don't go anywhere today. Cancel that appointment. Do not leave this house." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine, as if trying to convey the weight of his warning through his stare alone. "You just trust an old friend on this one. There are things out there worse than being sick." The urgency in his voice, combined with his furtive actions, sent a cold chill running down my spine, colder than the morning air. The shears in my hand suddenly felt heavy and foreign. I looked into the weathered face of the man who had known my husband in some ways better than I had. He wasn't one for jokes, nor was he an alarmist. But a checkup? What danger could there possibly be? It was an act of care, of love. Art? I don't understand, I stammered, feeling my voice weaken. It's just a clinic. Claire worked so hard to arrange it. I know, he cut me off, his tone still sharp and insistent. I know she means well, but some people don't. Susan, he leaned in even closer, his voice almost a breath. For the sake of my friendship with Michael, please listen to me this one time. Stay home, lock your doors. Make up any excuse you have to, but do not go. Michael's name, spoken in this context, carried a special weight. This wasn't just neighborly advice anymore. It had become a plea wrapped in the legacy of the past, of friendship and loyalty. He didn't explain further. He knew that saying more might endanger himself. He just gave me a firm nod, turned, and continued his walk as if our conversation had never happened. He left me standing there among the brilliant roses, his words hanging in the air, invisible but heavy as lead. I looked down at the soft, velvety petals. A moment ago, they were symbols of beauty and love. Now, their deep red color suddenly reminded me of something else, something alarming. I had made a promise to Claire. A mother's promise. I couldn't let her down, couldn't plant another seed of worry in the already barren soil of her mind. But Mr. Henderson's words, from a friend of Michael's, felt like a warning from a world I thought had been buried with my husband. My heart was torn between love for the future and trust in the past. And for the first time on this seemingly ordinary morning, I felt a real, creeping fear. A vague but chilling sense that my garden was no longer a safe haven, and that even the most beautiful roses could hide the most wicked thorns. His mention of Michael's name unlocked a memory, one I had tried to keep sealed away. I remembered a gray afternoon a few weeks before Michael passed. He was so weak he could barely get out of bed, but that day he insisted I help him out to the porch. Mr. Henderson had come over, not with a casserole as he often did, but with a rare, serious expression on his face. I had gone inside to make tea, but through the window, I saw Michael shakily hand Mr. Henderson a small, old wooden box. It didn't look like much, but the way Michael passed it to him was so formal, so solemn. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read my husband's lips, the last words he said to his best friend. If they come for her, Jim, use this. Don't hesitate. Promise me. Mr. Henderson, who I'd always known as Art, had given a single, sharp nod. I promise, Mike. He then tucked the box inside his jacket, and they just sat there in silence together until it got dark. At the time, I was too wrapped up in my grief to think much of it. But now, his warning, combined with the memory of that mysterious box, wove together a tapestry of a frightening truth I didn't want to face. That promise wasn't just a friendly vow. It was a final pact, a preparation for a battle I didn't even know was coming. I went back inside, shutting the door behind me a little harder than necessary, as if I were trying to block out not just the morning chill, but Mr. Henderson's ominous warnings that were seeping into every corner of my mind. The silence in the house no longer felt peaceful and protective. It felt suffocating, oppressive. Everything seemed to be holding its breath. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the living room, a sound I usually loved for its steady rhythm, now sounded like a countdown to something unknown, each tick a small hammer blow against my growing anxiety. I paced back and forth on the worn Persian rug, my invisible footsteps creating a trail of confusion. My mind was a tangled mess, a courtroom drama with two opposing sides. On one side was the image of my daughter, Claire, with her tired eyes and strained smile, a daughter doing everything in her power to care for her mother. My promise to her, the promise to go to this checkup, had become a symbol of a mother's love, something I had to hold on to. But on the other side was Mr. Henderson, Michael's loyal friend, with his grave expression and his cryptic whispers. His warning, carrying the weight of the past and my trust in him, planted a toxic seed of doubt in my heart. A part of me, the logical, cautious part, wanted to pick up the phone and call Claire right then and there. I'd tell her I wasn't feeling well, that the old age aches in my back had suddenly gotten worse. It would be a white lie, a perfect excuse to delay, to buy me some time to think, to appease both sides. But another part of me, the motherly instinct, screamed in protest. I pictured the look of disappointment on Claire's face. I could hear the anxiety in her voice ratchet up, turning into a small panic. She would think I was hiding an illness, that I was starting down the same path her father had walked. No, I couldn't make her worry any more than she already was. I couldn't be the source of another one of her heartaches. Mr. Henderson must be overreacting. Maybe he'd heard some silly rumor about the clinic. Old folks can be suspicious like that sometimes. I had to trust my daughter. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and I couldn't let a vague warning tear it down. I made my decision. I would go. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the knot of unease tightening in my chest. I had to be strong, for Claire. I glanced at the clock. It was almost time. I needed to call a cab. My hand had just touched the old rotary phone, its beige plastic yellowed with age, when it suddenly rang. Its shrill, sharp ring echoed through the quiet house, making me jump, my heart skipping a beat. It was Claire. A strange coincidence. "Mom," her voice came through the line, but it wasn't her usual gentle tone. It was mixed with ragged breaths and an unconcealed frustration. "My car broke down. It won't start. Damn it. I've tried everything." A short pause, filled only by her heavy breathing. "I can't take you. I guess we'll have to reschedule." A strange, almost guilty sense of relief washed over me. Mr. Henderson's warning, the car breaking down. It was as if fate, or some other force, had made the decision for me. I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to disappoint Claire. It was all perfectly resolved. "Oh, that's okay, honey," I said, and this time I had to work hard to hide the relief in my voice. "It's just bad luck. Don't worry about it. We can go next week." "No." Claire's shout on the other end of the line stunned me. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was panic. A level of panic completely out of proportion for a broken-down car. A panic so intense it made my stomach clench. "This appointment is important, you understand? Very important. Wait there. I'm calling you a rideshare right now. I'll pay for it. You absolutely have to go." "But Claire, if you can't be there with me, then what's the point of me going alone?" I tried to protest weakly. "I'll meet you there." She cut me off. Her voice rushed, the words tumbling out like a waterfall. "I'll call a mechanic and then take the bus. It'll take me a while, but I'll get there. Just go on ahead. Please, Mom, don't cancel. Please." The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a dead dial tone buzzing in my ear. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand still trembling. The relief I'd felt moments ago had vanished, evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. All that remained was that vague sense of unease, which was now becoming sharp and clear. Her behavior was so strange. Why couldn't a routine checkup be rescheduled? Why was she panicking like that over something so seemingly normal? I sank into the old armchair, its floral fabric faded, feeling as exhausted as if I'd just run a marathon. I tried to piece together the confusing fragments dancing in my head. Claire's urgency, Mr. Henderson's warning, the car that suddenly broke down, her insistence that I had to go alone, to a place I didn't know. Everything felt wrong. But then, a mother's brain, a brain programmed to love, to protect, to find the most generous explanation for a child's actions, kicked into gear. There was only one explanation that could soothe my rising fear, one explanation I desperately wanted to believe. She was just worried about me. Maybe she was afraid that if we canceled, it would be a long time before another free slot opened up. Maybe she had fought really hard to get this appointment, and she didn't want her efforts to go to waste. Her panic, perhaps, was just an extreme expression of her love and fear of loss, amplified by the stress and exhaustion she was already under. I clung to that explanation like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood. I chose to believe it, because the alternative, the one suggested by Mr. Henderson's warning, the one about some nameless danger waiting for me, was just too terrifying to consider. I sat there, in the silence of my house, and waited for the car my daughter had called. waited to be taken to a place where, I had no idea, the truth about my daughter's love and the very value of my life would be laid bare in the most brutal way imaginable. About an hour later, an eternity that I spent pacing the living room, trying to bat away dark thoughts, a car pulled up to my curb. But it wasn't an unfamiliar Uber or Lyft with a sticker in the window. It was Claire's own old, silver-blue Honda Civic. I stood frozen at the window, watching her get out of the driver's seat. The car looked perfectly fine, not a single sign of a breakdown. My heart dropped. A lie. A bald-faced lie. She rang the doorbell, a short, hurried press. I took a deep breath, trying to arrange my features into a mask of calm before opening the door. Claire stood there, a strained smile plastered on her face, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Got it fixed," she said quickly, her voice unnaturally flat. "It was just a small issue with the ignition. Let's go, we're going to be late." She didn't wait for my reply, just turned and walked briskly back to the car as if she were afraid that if she stayed a second longer, I would question her. I silently locked the door, the feeling of unease now a heavy stone in my chest. It was all too clear. She had lied to me. But why? Why would she construct such an elaborate charade just to make sure I got to this appointment? Sliding into the passenger seat, I could feel a tense silence envelop the small space of the car. It wasn't our usual comfortable quiet between mother and daughter. It was a silence full of unsaid things, heavy and suffocating. Claire focused on driving, her hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. She kept glancing at her phone mounted on the dash, scrolling through notifications with a restless energy. To break the unbearable silence, I spoke first. "How's work been, honey?" "Same old, Mom," she replied quietly, her eyes still glued to the road. "Lots of work, not enough pay." The air in the car grew heavy, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Claire gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Suddenly, as if a pressure valve inside her had finally burst, she started talking, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Do you remember last Tuesday night? The night of the big storm?" Claire asked, but she didn't wait for an answer. Her voice was like a floodgate opening, and I was swept into her memory, a memory that was cold and soaking wet. The night had descended like a drenched shroud. The Portland rain wasn't romantic. It howled and beat against the windows of Claire's car like angry fists. 3 a.m. Her shift at the bar had just ended, her body ached, and the smell of burnt coffee and spilled liquor clung to her clothes, a perfume of pure exhaustion. As she staggered out of her car, each step heavy on the pavement, the cold rain soaked through her thin jacket, chilling her to the bone. When she reached her front door, she froze. Her heart stopped for a second. There, under the dim porch light, stuck firmly to the familiar wooden door, was a red envelope. It wasn't a festive red. It was the red of a warning, of blood, of an ending, a death sentence for our home, packaged in a waterproof piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she tore it off. The final foreclosure notice, the bold, cold letters danced before her eyes, blurred not by the rain, but by the tears that were starting to fall. Standing there, in the downpour, holding that soggy paper in her hand, my strong daughter completely fell apart. Her thin shoulders shook, and a choked, desperate sob escaped her, mixing with the sound of the falling rain. She went inside, didn't turn on the lights. The kitchen was plunged into darkness, save for the ghostly glow of the street lamp filtering through the window, casting crooked shadows. She slumped into a chair, buried her head in her arms on the table, and let the silence and darkness swallow her whole. It was then, amidst the pile of junk mail and bills she had let accumulate for weeks, that her eyes caught on something different. A glossy, professionally designed business card with a sophisticated silver and blue logo. Aethelred Genomics, your legacy, our future. At first, she was going to crumple it up, another scam. But then, her desperate eyes glanced at the old photo of me and Michael on the fridge, our bright smiles from a distant, carefree past. The monster of desperation inside her began to whisper. She picked up the card. The small print came into focus in the dim light. Contribute to advanced medical research. Receive significant financial compensation. A fierce, silent battle raged within her. One part of her screamed that this was wrong, that it was insane. But another voice, The voice of exhaustion, of sleepless nights and endless shifts, spoke with a seductive charm. "This is the only way," that voice whispered. "There's nothing else you can do. You've already lost." She looked around the house, at the cracks in the walls, her father's worn-out chair, and felt the weight of the debt that was crushing this roof. Then she thought of me. She thought of my aching back, my penny pinching, my lonely life after Dad was gone. Mom won't have to suffer anymore. The cruel rationalization began to take root. She won't have to live in poverty, worrying until the end of her days. This is a release. The business card in her hand was no longer an option. It had become a salvation, a twisted, horrible salvation. She clung to it like a drowning woman to a piece of wreckage. This will be her legacy, she told herself, and that was the final lie, the biggest lie she told herself so she could go on. She will save people, and she will save me. She will be a hero. She looked up from the memory, her eyes on me, but it was like she was looking right through me, back to that terrible decision in the dark kitchen. There was a distorted conviction in her eyes. Standing there in the cold rain, holding that wet paper, I just broke, Mom. I realized that no matter how many extra shifts I picked up, no matter how many lattes I served, I couldn't save our house. I had failed. Dad's only legacy was about to be snatched away. Her voice choked with emotion. I told myself, instead of letting you just wither away in poverty, why not let you do something truly great? You have special blood. You could be a hero who saves humanity, not a burden. I listened in silence. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That stormy night, my strong daughter had reached her breaking point. Claire continued, her voice now taking on a strange, fanatical tone, as if she were trying to hypnotize herself. And then I found that clinic's business card in the mailbox. At first, I was going to throw it out. But then I thought about how much you're suffering. Your back hurts every day. You have to count every penny for your medicine. Your life is just a slow, painful existence. She glanced at me, her eyes flashing with that twisted belief. I told myself, instead of letting you wither away in poverty, why not let you do something great? You have special blood. You could be a hero who helps all of mankind, instead of being a burden. Then suddenly, as if my casual question had accidentally hit a small crack in the emotional dam she had so carefully constructed, a whole flood of pent-up desperation began to pour out, unstoppable. She started talking, at first just disjointed murmurs, but they gradually coalesced into a torrent of misery. She talked about the credit card interest rates, which she called the invisible monster, growing day by day, eating away her meager paychecks before she even saw them. She told me about sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, crunching numbers in her head, trying to move non-existent funds from one column to another in a desperate game of chess she knew she was doomed to lose. She talked about the shame of paying for a few groceries with the last of the change in her wallet, about having to turn down a simple coffee invitation from a coworker because she didn't dare spend a single unplanned dollar. Every word was a small knife, not of steel, but of harsh reality, twisting deep into my own helplessness. I sat there, stunned into silence, just listening. I knew we were struggling, but I had no idea the abyss was this deep. She had shielded me, had carried it all alone, leaving me with an illusion of peace. She wasn't crying, but I could hear the invisible tears in her voice, a desperation that had been suppressed for so long it had become brittle and sharp. "I'm so tired, Mom," she whispered, and that simple sentence carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. "I'm tired of pretending to be strong. I'm tired of worrying. I miss Dad. If Dad were here, he'd know what to do." Michael's name, spoken with such utter helplessness, completely broke my composure. Hearing her mention him, with such a childlike longing, made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach out and wrap my arms around her trembling shoulders, to tell her everything would be okay, that we would find a way together, but I knew it would be a lie. What could I say? That my small pension could weather this storm of debt? That we could sell a few old heirlooms to save the house? Those were just empty platitudes in the face of a cruel reality. And in that moment, looking into my daughter's eyes, sunken with exhaustion, I understood. I completely understood. This health appointment, her insistence, the broken-down car, It all stemmed from more than just love. It stemmed from this deep pit of desperation. She wasn't just seeking reassurance about my health. She was looking for a way out, at any cost. "Claire, honey," I started, trying to keep my voice from trembling, even as my heart was breaking. "Listen to me. We still have a little. I still have the savings account your father left. It's not much, but—" "No, Mom," Claire cut me off, her voice frighteningly resolute. She shook her head, a sharp, definitive motion as if to ward off her own weakness. "That money won't be enough. It's just a drop in the bucket. It would only buy us another month, maybe 2. And then what? We'd be right back where we started." "But it's all we have," I whispered, my throat feeling dry. "No, it's not." She turned to look at me, and for the first time, I didn't see desperation in her eyes anymore. Instead, there was a strange light, an almost terrifying fervor. "It's not all, Mom. After today, everything is going to be different." "Different how, Claire?" "I don't understand," I asked, a cold sense of dread beginning to creep into my mind. "You don't need to understand right now," she said, her voice soft but full of certainty. "You just need to trust me, like I've always trusted you." She reached out and took my hand, her grip so tight it almost hurt. "After today, we'll never have to worry about those red letters again. We'll pay off the hospital bills. We'll keep the house. I could even quit the barista job. We could go on a trip, just like Dad always wanted." She painted a picture of a bright future, a paradise built on the foundation of some unknown secret. But instead of feeling comforted, I only felt fear. Her confidence was baseless. It was like the faith of a gambler betting everything they have on one last hand. "Claire, what are you talking about?" I pressed. "Where is this money coming from? What is this checkup really about?" She just smiled, a distant, mysterious smile. "They say health is wealth, right, Mom? You just need to know that. Today, your health is worth more than gold. It's our salvation." With that, she turned back to the road, focusing on her driving, leaving me there with a tangle of unanswered questions and a fear that was growing by the second. She was no longer my desperate daughter. She had become a stranger, one who held a secret that could decide both of our fates. As we stopped at a red light, Claire turned to me, and then she did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She took my hand. Her own was cold and clammy. "Mom," she began, her voice a whispered confession. "This checkup, it might be a little strange. They're going to take some blood, maybe more than usual. But it's really important." I looked into her eyes, searching for an answer. But her eyes, the same blue eyes as Michael's, shifted away, focusing on some indefinite point on the dashboard. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to say something terrible. "I spoke with the doctors there. They said you have something very special in your blood. Something that could help a lot of people." "Help a lot of people?" I asked, bewildered, trying to make sense of her vague words. "Yes," she nodded, still not looking at me. "And they're going to pay a very large sum of money for that contribution, an amount that could change everything for us." Finally, she turned to look at me, and in that moment, I didn't see my daughter anymore. I saw a stranger with tear-filled eyes and a raw, naked desperation. Her voice broke. "Think about it, Mom. You're 66 years old. You probably only have a few more years to live." Those words, coming from the mouth of the child I loved more than life itself, hurt more than a physical blow. It wasn't a medical fact. It was an appraisal, a cold calculation. "This will be your legacy, don't you see?" she continued, her voice pleading, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as me. "You'll save people, and you'll save me, too." The light turned green. The car moved forward. But for me, the world seemed to have stopped. I pulled my hand away from hers, the chill from her skin seeming to have seeped into my very bones. I understood now. This wasn't a checkup. It was a transaction. And the product being sold was me. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so cruel. It didn't use force or threats. It used my own love, a mother's own self-sacrifice, as a weapon. She had turned my worry for her into a tool to lead me here. She had turned my final years into a cash value asset. I sat there, numb, staring out the window. The familiar streets of Portland passed by, but I didn't recognize them anymore. Everything was a blur behind a curtain of tears I fought to keep from falling. Mr. Henderson's warning now echoed in my head, no longer a suspicion, but a horrible truth. But the danger wasn't coming from some faceless enemy. It was coming from the daughter I had given birth to, sitting right beside me, driving me to what she believed was her salvation, but what could very well be my end. Claire's car turned onto a street I'd never been down before, a modern office park on the outskirts of the city where glass and steel buildings rose proudly against the gray Portland sky. The place was completely alien to me. No old oak trees, no cozy little shops, just the cold, impersonal feel of concrete and our own distorted reflections in the dark-tinted windows. Claire drove down into a dimly lit parking garage, the tires whining mournfully on the smooth concrete floor. She killed the engine, and the sudden silence was even more terrifying than the sound of the motor. We sat there for a few seconds, trapped in the car's confined space. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. Claire's cruel words still hung in the air, invisible but sharp as glass. I turned to look at her. She was staring straight ahead, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. Her expression no longer desperate or pleading. It had been replaced by a hard resolve, a cold acceptance, as if she had crossed some internal line and there was no turning back. "We're here," she said, her voice flat and emotionless as she unbuckled her seatbelt. We got out of the car, our footsteps echoing strangely in the empty garage. Claire walked ahead, her pace quick and determined. I followed behind, feeling like a prisoner being escorted to my fate. With every step, I felt a resistance from my own body. My knees were trembling, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. A part of me wanted to turn and run from this place, run from her, run from this brutal truth. But another part, the mother in me, still couldn't leave her. Whatever she had done, she was still my daughter. And a vague, terrifying feeling that if I left now, I would lose her forever, kept my feet moving forward. Claire led me to a gleaming stainless steel elevator. She swiped a white plastic keycard, and the doors slid open silently. Inside, the cold, blue-white light made Claire's face look even paler. She pressed the button for the 12th floor, the top floor. The elevator ascended smoothly, without a sound, only the red digital numbers climbing, counting down to our fateful meeting. I watched our reflections on the metal wall. We stood side by side, but there was an immeasurable distance between us. The elevator doors opened to reveal a space completely unlike what I'd imagined for a clinic. This was the lobby of a major corporation, luxurious but soulless. The floors were polished white marble, the walls adorned with expensive abstract art, and the air carried a faint, artificial scent, clean to the point of being sterile. There wasn't a soul in sight, no busy nurses, no crying children, just a single woman sitting behind a massive glass reception desk, a professional smile cemented on her face. "Miss Sterling," the woman said, her voice sweet but utterly devoid of warmth. "Dr. Finch is expecting you and your mother." Claire just nodded. We were led down a long hallway, flanked by unmarked ebony doors. The click-clack of the receptionist's heels on the marble floor was a monotonous, foreboding rhythm. Finally, she stopped before a set of double doors and knocked gently. A deep, smooth voice called from within, "Come in." The doors opened. I held my breath. The room was a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. A man stood with his back to us, looking out the window. He was wearing a white lab coat over an expensive suit, a strange combination. When he heard us enter, he slowly turned around. He was youngish, maybe in his early 40s, with neatly trimmed dark hair and handsome features, but his eyes, a cold, flat gray, had a piercing, analytical quality. He looked at us, not like a doctor looks at a patient or a man looks at two women. He looked at us the way a scientist observes specimens, the way a collector admires two rare acquisitions that have just arrived. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome, Mrs. Sterling. I'm so glad we could finally meet." He spoke to me, but then his gaze flickered to Claire, a fleeting look that held both acknowledgement and a hint of contempt. "And Miss Sterling, thank you for bringing your mother to us." He walked toward us but didn't offer a hand to shake. He stopped a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his lab coat, and began to openly study me from head to toe. I felt less like a person, and more like an object being appraised for its value. And in that moment, amid the sterile luxury of this room, under the cold gaze of this stranger, I knew that Mr. Henderson's warning wasn't just true. It was a truth far more horrific than anything I could have imagined. We had walked right into the lion's den, and the door, I was sure, had just slammed shut behind us. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, hard to breathe. The man who introduced himself as Dr. Finch stood there, an aura of smugness radiating from him like a cold draft. He didn't invite us to sit. He wanted us standing, in a position of weakness, like supplicants before a king. Claire, my daughter, seemed to sense the shift in power. The hard resolve she'd worn in the car was starting to crack, replaced by a creeping confusion and fear. "Asset?" Claire frowned, repeating his word, a tremor in her voice she was trying to hide. "What are you talking about?" The contract said my mother would be agreeing to donate blood samples for research, and that we would be compensated for that contribution. She emphasized the word contract, as if that piece of paper was the only shield she had. Julian Finch laughed, a cold, condescending sound that echoed in the lavish room. It wasn't the laugh of amusement, but of a predator enjoying the naivety of its prey. "Contract?" he sneered. "Oh, you poor girl. That wasn't a contract, it was a bill of sale, and the broker, the one who signed away her own mother, was you." He turned to me, but his venomous words were aimed squarely at Claire, each one a poison-tipped arrow. "Do you have any idea what your daughter told us, Susan? She didn't come to us as a concerned child. No, she came as a salesperson, and the product she was selling was you." My head was spinning. The image of the luxurious room blurred, and another scene materialized in my mind, a vision woven from my daughter's desperation and this monster's cunning. I could see it all so clearly, as if I had been there myself on that fateful day. Claire sat on the edge of a plush leather chair, the very one Finch had just gestured to. She was wearing her nicest work clothes, but she looked small and out of place amidst the cold opulence. Her hands clutched the strap of her old handbag in her lap, a desperate attempt to keep them steady. And Finch, he wasn't sitting behind his large, imposing desk. No, he was in the chair opposite her, closer, creating an illusion of intimacy and understanding. He didn't talk about money first, he talked about legacy. "Miss Sterling." His voice was deep and empathetic, like a therapist's, not a fanatic scientist's. "I've read your file. I understand the burdens you're facing, and I also understand the love you have for your mother." He paused, letting those words sink into Claire's troubled mind. "We're not here to buy or sell, Claire. We're here to offer an opportunity. An opportunity for your mother, Susan, to fulfill a great purpose. Her bloodline is a gift to humanity, and we simply want to help her share that gift." Claire, my poor, lost daughter, had taken the bait. I saw her look up, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. "But what is the procedure?" she asked, her voice still trembling. "Is it painful? Is it dangerous?" Finch smiled, a perfectly benevolent and reassuring smile. "Not at all. Think of it as a special kind of donation, conducted under the most advanced medical care. A series of painless tests, a procedure that will allow us to collect and replicate the miraculous gift she carries within her. Your mother will be treated like a queen. She will be honored, not harmed." Honored. He used that very word. He painted a picture of noble sacrifice, not a cold-hearted transaction. Only after he'd laid that false moral foundation did he bring up the money. "And of course," he said, his voice dropping as if it were a minor detail, "Aethelred Genomics understands that such a contribution deserves to be recognized. We wish to provide the family with a research grant, a thank you fund, to ensure you can continue to care for your mother's legacy without the worry of these earthly burdens." He hadn't sold her a contract, he had sold her absolution. The vision shattered. I was back in the harsh reality of the room, with Finch's smug face and my daughter's ashen one. Every word he spoke was like a shard of broken glass stabbing at my heart. I turned to look at Claire. She was pale as a ghost, her mouth hanging open as if she couldn't breathe. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. She wanted to protest, but no sound could escape the throat that was now choked with the truth. Julian Finch continued, his voice full of cruel relish, as if he were savoring every moment of this destruction. She sat right there in that chair. He gestured with his chin toward the plush leather seat, and she pitched the deal. She told us you were old, your health was failing, and that you didn't have much longer to live anyway. She used those exact words, not much longer to live. He paused, letting the cruelty of that statement sink in. She said this donation would be a fitting legacy, a way for your existence to finally have value, a way for you to atone for leaving her with such a financial burden. I felt as though someone had punched me in the chest. I had to grab the arm of a nearby chair to keep from collapsing. He wasn't just revealing his plan. He was dissecting my daughter's soul, exposing all the selfishness, calculation, and cruelty she had disguised as love. She assured us you wouldn't refuse, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a more sinister tone. Because, and I quote, "a mother's love is blind. She calculated your worth, trading your final years for her own prosperous future. Such admirable devotion." He paused, then took a step closer to us, his demeanor shifting from detached to directly threatening. "My name is Julian Finch. My father, Dr. Alistair Finch, founded the original project that studied you years ago, a project called Cassandra." He said the name with a sick reverence. "My father was a visionary. He discovered something the world wasn't ready for. He discovered you, Susan, or rather, what flows in your veins." Finch stared at me, his cold gray eyes trying to see through my skin, into my very cells. "Your legacy isn't just special, it's a miracle of biology. The stem cells in your bone marrow possess a near-perfect regenerative ability. They don't degrade with age. They can repair almost any damage at a cellular level. Do you know what that means?" He didn't wait for an answer. "It means immunity, the end of cancer, of Alzheimer's, of the aging process itself. It's not the key to evolution. It is evolution." His words were insane, yet they explained little things I'd never understood. But what about the aches in my back every morning, the stiffness that made gardening a chore, the pills Claire worked so hard to buy for me? As if reading the doubt in my eyes, Finch gave a condescending smile, like a professor explaining a basic concept to a slow child. "Ah, I see you're wondering," he said. "You're asking yourself why such a perfect vessel would still feel the strains of age, aren't you? It's quite simple. Imagine your body is a historic building constructed from magical bricks." He held up his hands, sketching in the air. "Those bricks your cells can repair and replace themselves perfectly. They never rot, never get attacked by termites, which is to say, disease. That's why you've never suffered a major illness. But the building itself, its framework, your skeleton, your cartilage, your nervous system still endures the weight of 66 years. Time still wears on the foundation, still puts stress on the structure." He looked directly at me, his explanation as cruel as a scalpel. "Your blood can kill a cancer cell the moment it forms, but it can't regenerate a worn-out disc in your spine. You don't feel the ravages of disease, Mrs. Sterling. You feel the inescapable weight of gravity and time. Those pills your daughter buys you? Simple painkillers, a futile attempt to paint over the cracks in an aging structure." I was speechless. His words sounded crazy, but deep inside, a faint memory stirred. The times I'd recovered from sickness with astonishing speed, the cuts that healed, leaving almost no scar. Things Michael and I had always just chalked up to good luck. "My father wanted to share this gift with the world," Finch continued, his voice laced with bitterness. "But he made one fatal mistake. He trusted one of his best researchers, a brilliant young man, who saw the infinite potential in your blood, but was horrified by the methods required to harness it." His gaze shifted to Claire, a deep, malicious stare. "Your father, Michael Sterling, was a traitor just like you, only his betrayal was on a grander scale. He didn't sell something for money. He stole it." Claire's jaw dropped. She was speechless. "That's right," Finch sneered. "Your husband, your father, was the one who helped you escape our research facility all those years ago. He destroyed almost all the data on Project Cassandra, created a new identity for you, and hid you from us all these years. He married you, lived a normal life, pretending you were just an ordinary woman, all while knowing he was hiding the cure for all of humanity, an unimaginable selfishness. Now I understood. Michael's illness, his final battle. He had died from a disease for which I, the wife who slept beside him every night, carried the cure within me. The horror and tragedy of that truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Michael hadn't just been protecting me from the world. He'd been protecting the world from me, or rather, from men like Finch who would exploit me. My father was too soft, Finch snarled, fanaticism blazing in his eyes. He allowed the love and selfishness of a mediocre scientist to steal the future of the human race. He paced in front of the giant glass window, his shadow stretching across the floor like a demon's. They called my father a failure, a genius who touched immortality and then let it slip through his fingers. They didn't understand his sacrifice, but I do. I have spent my entire life correcting that mistake, finding you, and finishing the great work he started. He stopped abruptly and turned back to us. He ran a slightly trembling hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. For the first time, I noticed a fragility, an instability beneath his cold exterior. You think I do this for glory? For money? He let out a dry, mirthless laugh. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of a failed legend? Worse, do you know what it's like to live with a genetic death sentence? A gift that same genius left to his own son. He looked straight at me, and in those cold gray eyes, I saw not just fanaticism, but desperation. A terrifying desperation, just like the one that had driven Claire down this path, but magnified 100 times over. My father, in his research into regeneration, accidentally activated a degenerative gene in our own family line, an incurable neurodegenerative disease. It killed him slowly, turning his brilliant mind to mush. And now, it's starting in me. His trembling hand was proof. So, you see, this isn't just about completing my father's legacy. It's about saving myself. But make no mistake, he said, his voice rising again into a fanatical pitch. My life is merely a side benefit. The ultimate goal is so much grander. He spread his arms wide, as if embracing the entire city below. Look out there. A dying world. People are born, suffer from disease, and die in fear. A horrendous waste of biological resources. You, Mrs. Sterling. You are the antidote. Your blood can end all of that. Billions of lives could be saved. Human lifespan could be extended by centuries. He came closer, his voice dropping to a persuasive whisper. So tell me, what is the life of one old woman, or even two, when weighed against the survival and ascension of an entire species? History will not call me a monster. They will call me a savior. Sacrificing a few individuals to save all of humanity is not a crime. It is a noble act. It is pure logic. His philosophy was horrifying because, in its twisted logic, it almost made sense. He didn't see himself as a villain. He believed he was a hero, making the hard choice no one else dared to make. And that made him more dangerous than any monster. Then he turned to Claire, his gaze shifting from fanaticism to pure contempt. And frankly, taking you along isn't just a matter of genetic convenience, it's a kindness. A creature willing to sell its own mother for money has no right to exist. Consider it me, helping to rid the world of one more ungrateful wretch. Now Claire understood. The horror in her eyes was no longer about a broken contract. It was the horror of recognizing her own true nature in the words of her enemy. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't even a valuable commodity. In his eyes, she was just a dirty tool, a disposable pawn who had served her purpose and was now being swept from the board. Now then, Julian Finch said, his voice becoming cold and decisive, as if the performance was over. He motioned to the two security guards who had been standing silently in the corner. We've wasted enough time on this family drama. Take them both to the prep room. Julian Finch's words hung in the cold air of the room, cruel and undeniable. They weren't just an accusation, they were a verdict, a brutal exposé that stripped away every layer of self-deception my daughter had wrapped herself in. Claire's world, the one built on a foundation of desperation and selfish rationalizations, crumbled before my very eyes. Her face, which just moments before held a look of hard determination, was now a portrait of complete devastation. It cycled from the pale white of shock to bewildered confusion, and finally landed on utter, abject terror. Her eyes were wide and vacant, staring at Julian Finch as if she couldn't process what she had just heard. She wasn't the broker of a lucrative deal. She wasn't a devoted daughter making a difficult choice. She was a puppet, and her strings had just been cut, leaving her abandoned and useless. She had sold herself, and worse, she had sold me, not for a brighter future, but for a shared destruction. No, you're lying, Claire finally managed to choke out, but her voice was just a broken whisper. Then, as if a dam had burst, a wave of desperate indignation washed over her, overpowering her initial fear. Her voice grew higher and sharper. "You can't do this. We have a contract, an agreement. I have the paperwork." She took a step back, her trembling hand fumbling in her purse, as if that piece of paper were a magic charm that could ward off the devil before her. "You promised me. You sat there and looked me right in the eye. And you told me this was a noble contribution, that my mother would be honored as a hero." Every word she spoke was an admission of her own naivety, of how easily she had been manipulated. She wasn't just accusing Finch, she was screaming the very lies she had used to deceive herself. $5 million, she shrieked, the number hanging in the air like an indictment. "That was the number you gave me. $5 million for a thank you fund. You said it would be enough to pay off the mortgage, to settle Dad's medical bills, to keep the house. You said I could quit my night job, that my mom and I could live in peace. You said it wasn't a price, it was a recognition." Her voice broke on the last word, the indignation giving way to a panicked plea. "You said you only needed her. You said she would be safe. That was the deal. Please." "The money. We need it. I did everything you asked. I convinced her. I lied to her. I sold my soul, because you promised I could buy our life back." It was the final confession, uttered not in remorse, but in the terror of realizing her moral sacrifice was all for nothing. She still couldn't accept that she wasn't the mastermind, but just a pawn in a much larger game, a pawn that had just been sacrificed. Julian Finch stepped closer, closing the distance Claire had just created. He looked down at her, not with anger, but with a cruel pity, like a scientist watching a trapped rat struggle in vain. "Yes, you did," he said, his voice flat and cold, his calm more frightening than any scream. "You proved to be a very useful tool, and a remarkably cheap one." He let the insult hang in the air. "We promised we would solve your financial problems, and we will. Once you become an asset of Athelred Genomics, you will no longer have any debt." He paused, tilting his head, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Of course, you'll also no longer have a bank account to receive that $5 million. You'll have no property, no possessions, no freedom, no name, not even the painful memories of your debts." He leaned closer, his voice a damning whisper. "We will wipe you clean. You'll become a blank slate, a pure vessel carrying half of a precious genome. You will have nothing." The two security guards, two giants in gray uniforms who had been silent until now, began to advance on us. They moved slowly, methodically, like wolves cornering their prey. Each of their footsteps on the marble floor was a beat of doom. I quickly grabbed Claire's hand. It was ice cold and shaking uncontrollably. The shock had given way to a primal fear, the fear of a trapped animal. She wasn't looking at Julian anymore. Her terrified eyes found mine, and in their blue depths, I saw a dawning, soul-crushing regret. She understood everything. She understood that in her desperate attempt to escape a cage of debt, she had single-handedly led us both into another, one made of steel and inhumanity, with no way out. She wasn't the betrayer anymore. Now she was just a scared child, and she was seeking protection from the very mother she had just sold. My instincts kicked in. I pulled her behind me, using my own aging body as a flimsy shield to protect her. "Don't you touch her," I said, and I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. The two gray giants were not deterred by my words. They were like machines, programmed to obey orders, incapable of processing human emotion. They kept coming, their soulless eyes fixed on us. The vast office suddenly felt small, the walls closing in, the air so thick I could feel its weight on my skin. I squeezed Claire's hand tighter, feeling every one of her tremors pass through me. She was sobbing behind me now, choked, desperate gasps suppressed in her throat. One of the guards was right in front of me. He was so tall he blocked the light from the window, his shadow falling over me like a dark cloud. He said nothing, simply reached a hand the size of a baseball glove toward my shoulder. I closed my eyes, bracing for the cold, rough touch, bracing for the beginning of the inevitable end. Crash! A deafening, earth-shattering sound ripped through the tense silence of the room. It wasn't a gunshot, but a chaotic, screeching sound of metal and splintering wood. I snapped my eyes open. The elegant ebony double doors we had just walked through were now blown half off their hinges, one hanging pathetically. White smoke from a fire extinguisher billowed in, filling the doorway, creating a chaotic and surreal scene. And then, from the middle of that white smoke, a figure stepped through. It was Mr. Henderson. But this wasn't the gentle Mr. Henderson, the widowed neighbor I was used to seeing trimming his hedges. This was a different man. Though he was still in his everyday clothes, a khaki jacket and slacks, his posture was straight and solid as a soldier's. The weary lines on his face were no longer filled with quiet sorrow, but with an ice-cold determination. The kind eyes behind his glasses were now sharp as a hawk's, scanning the room, assessing the situation with a terrifying calm. He was still holding the now empty fire extinguisher, the makeshift battering ram he'd used to break down the door. Julian Finch was the first to recover from the shock. The smugness on his face twisted into rage and disbelief. "Who are you?" he roared. "Security! Get him!" The two giants, who had been closing in on us, immediately turned, redirecting their focus to Mr. Henderson. They were like two hounds that had spotted new, more threatening prey. "I'm just an old friend keeping a promise," Mr. Henderson said, his voice low and steady, without a trace of fear. He dropped the empty extinguisher to the floor with a loud clang and reached inside his khaki jacket. The lead guard charged at him, huge and aggressive, but Mr. Henderson moved with a surprising speed and precision that completely betrayed his age. He didn't retreat. He stepped forward, pivoted, and used the giant's own momentum to send him sprawling to the floor. The second guard, larger but slightly slower, hesitated for a split second. That second was all it took. The object Mr. Henderson pulled from his jacket wasn't a gun. It was a small, metallic device, long and thin like a fountain pen. He clicked a button on the end, and a soft hiss was heard. A thin blue light flashed. The second guard crumpled to the ground without a sound, like a puppet with its strings cut. The entire room was silent. Julian Finch stared at his unconscious employee on the floor, then at the device in Mr. Henderson's hand, his expression shifting from rage to horrified recognition. A neural suppression taser, military grade, he stammered. "That's impossible. Those were decommissioned years ago." "Who? What are you?" Mr. Henderson didn't answer him. He turned to me, his sharp gaze softening for just a moment. "I promised Michael I'd look out for you, Susan. I'm sorry I didn't do a better job of it." Then he glanced toward the ruined doorway. "The police are on their way." I tripped the alarms on my way in. "We don't have much time." The chaos Mr. Henderson had created gave us a chance, an escape. "Run." "Susan!" he yelled, his voice no longer a whisper over a fence, but a resounding command. "Get the girl and go!" Julian Finch, now completely unhinged, screamed wildly. "Lock it down. Initiate lockdown procedures. Don't let them escape." But it was too late. Survival instinct took over. I grabbed Claire's hand. She was still stunned by the scene unfolding before her. "Claire, let's go," I urged, pulling her hard. The panic finally jolted her back to reality. We started running toward the white smoke and the shattered door. We ran past the unconscious guard, past Mr. Henderson, who now stood between us and Julian Finch, a silent protector, an old soldier on his last mission. As we burst out into the hallway, I glanced back. I saw Julian Finch pulling a small pistol from his desk drawer. "Mr. Henderson, look out!" I screamed. He just looked at me, gave a slight nod, and turned back to face Julian. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. We scrambled inside. As the stainless steel doors were closing, the last thing I saw was Mr. Henderson charging toward Julian Finch without a moment's hesitation. Then the doors slammed shut, sealing us in the metallic silence of the box, with only the sound of our own frantic heartbeats and gasping breaths. We were out, but my friend, my protector, was still back there. The elevator descended in an eerie silence. Claire had collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, while I leaned against the cold metal wall, my heart still racing. "Him, Mr. Henderson, how is that possible?" Claire stammered, unable to believe what just happened. Suddenly, a low, slightly distorted voice came from the small speaker in the elevator ceiling. "Susan, Claire, can you hear me?" It was Mr. Henderson's voice. "Art!" I cried out, pressing my ear to the panel. "Are you okay? What's happening?" "I'm fine," his voice crackled, mixed with the sounds of chaos in the background. "Not much time. Listen, the box Michael gave me contained all the evidence against Ethelred. It also contained a tiny tracking device. This morning, when I warned you at the fence, I discreetly attached it to the undercarriage of Claire's car. I couldn't stop you from going, because I needed you to walk right into the lion's den. I was stunned. Why? Why would you let us walk into that danger? Because it was only when the asset was physically present at their headquarters that the device's signal could trigger an emergency report to some of my old colleagues at the federal level. This isn't a simple kidnapping, Susan. This is a matter of national security. The local police couldn't handle it. I had to wait until they had you to have them caught red-handed. I am so sorry I had to let you be that afraid." His voice cut out for a moment. "Get to the parking garage and drive. Don't stop for anything. It's almost over." The line went dead, leaving us in silence with the staggering truth. Mr. Henderson wasn't just a hero, he was a strategist, and we had been both the bait and the trigger in his final, desperate plan. The elevator descended in a silence that felt deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just fled. Claire and I huddled in the corner, two wounded animals seeking shelter. I was still clutching her hand, feeling the ceaseless tremors that shook her body. She said nothing, just gasped for breath in short, ragged bursts. The cold, blue-white light of the elevator illuminated her face, highlighting her pale skin and her wide, vacant eyes. When the elevator doors opened into the parking garage, the first sound we heard wasn't the dead silence from before. It was a piercing, shrill security alarm, echoing off the concrete walls, drilling into our already frayed nerves. And then, from the distance, came another sound. A sound that, under the circumstances, was the sweetest music I could imagine. The wail of police sirens roaring, growing louder, closing in. Mr. Henderson had told the truth. He had called them. Ethelred was exposed. The chaos he had created wasn't just a diversion. It was a plan, a sacrificial plan. He had bought us precious seconds to escape, using himself as the delay to give the police time to arrive. A wave of gratitude and fear for his fate washed over me, but the instinct to survive was stronger. We had to get out of there. We bolted from the elevator, running toward Claire's car. My own 66-year-old legs seemed to have forgotten their usual aches and pains. They just ran. We scrambled into the car, and Claire, with her shaking hands, took 2 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. She slammed her foot on the gas, and the car shot forward, tires screeching on the concrete, leaving behind the cold glass building where our nightmare had begun and, for now, had ended. As the car sped up the ramp out of the garage and merged onto the street, we saw them. 3 police cruisers, their red and blue lights flashing frantically, were blocking the entrance to the office park. Officers in tactical gear were pouring out, rifles at the ready. We had made it out just in the nick of time. Claire drove aimlessly. She didn't know where she was going, and I didn't ask. We just needed to drive, to get as far away from that place as possible. After about 15 minutes of silent driving, filled only with our ragged breathing and the fading sound of sirens, Claire abruptly pulled over to the side of a quiet residential street, under the branches of an old maple tree. She cut the engine, and then, with the immediate danger gone, wrapped in the relative safety of the car, the final defensive wall in Claire's mind completely crumbled. The brutal truth she had tried to ignore, the crushing weight of guilt she had tried to suppress, came crashing down on her like an avalanche. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead. Her shoulders began to shake, just a little at first, then more violently. And then, a single, choked sob escaped her throat, a sound of pure, heart-wrenching anguish. She dropped her head to the steering wheel and began to weep. It wasn't the cry of fear or relief. It was the sound of repentance, the sound of a broken soul. She sobbed, each wrenching sound tearing through the silence, her body shaking uncontrollably. She understood. She understood that she hadn't just nearly lost her own freedom. She had nearly condemned her mother to death, or a fate far worse. The thought that she had been willing to trade my last years for money, a thought she had rationalized with desperation, now appeared to her as a hideous monster gnawing at her conscience. The brutal reality that money couldn't buy back a life, couldn't buy back love, had dealt a mortal blow to her spirit. Suddenly, she threw open the car door and stumbled out. I was startled, about to call after her, but she only took a few steps before collapsing to her knees on the cold, damp pavement, right next to a puddle left over from last night's rain. She knelt there, in the quiet of the suburban street, and she wept. She buried her face in her hands, and her cries were more painful than any alarm. "Mom, I'm so sorry." She sobbed through her fingers, her voice cracked and broken. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry." She repeated the words over and over, like a prayer, like a confession. She wasn't just apologizing for lying to me. She was apologizing for putting a price on my life. She was apologizing for letting desperation turn her into a monster. She was apologizing for betraying the most sacred thing of all, a mother's love. Watching her kneeling on the cold ground, trembling and shattered, my heart ached. The anger, the disappointment, it all melted away. All that was left was the love of a mother for her suffering child. I opened my car door. The aches in my knees that I had forgotten in the panic now returned, but I didn't care. I slowly got out of the car, the cool afternoon air filling my lungs, a sharp contrast to the suffocation we had just endured. I walked over to where Claire was still on her knees, her small frame convulsed with sobs. The gray, overcast Portland sky seemed to be weeping with us. I stood there for a moment, looking down at my daughter. I saw the 3-year-old who had sobbed after breaking my favorite vase. I saw the teenager who had locked herself in her room for hours after her first big fight with a boyfriend. I saw the young woman who had stood so strong and delivered the eulogy at her father's funeral without shedding a single tear, though I knew her heart was breaking. And now, I saw all of those people combined, kneeling before me, broken and utterly destroyed by her own actions. How could I stay angry? The rage, the pain of betrayal, all the negative emotions that had been boiling inside me just hours before now seemed to cool, extinguished by the flood of her repentant tears. All that remained was a deep ache, a sadness not for myself, but for her. A sadness that the child I had raised, the one I had spent my life protecting, could be pushed by life to a point where she had to make such a monstrous choice. I slowly knelt beside her, letting the cold, damp concrete seep through the fabric of my pants. The knees of a 66-year-old woman weren't made for this, but the heart of a mother was. I said nothing. No words of blame, no. How could you? Because I already knew the answer. The answer was in the stacks of bills on our table, in the nights she worked until she was exhausted, in the loss of Michael. The answer was desperation. Instead, I simply reached out my arms and pulled her into a hug. At first, her body went rigid with surprise. She had probably been expecting me to yell, to reject her, to give her the punishment she deserved. But then, as she felt the warmth of my embrace, her last wall of defense completely dissolved. She collapsed against me, burying her face in my shoulder, and she wailed. This time, her cries were unrestrained. They were loud, desolate, a release of all the pain, fear, and guilt she had been carrying. I held her trembling shoulders tightly, letting her tears soak my jacket, feeling each of her shuddering sobs as if they were happening in my own chest. We had survived. Physically, we had escaped Aethelred, but something precious between us, that unconditional trust, the innocence of our mother-daughter bond had been nearly shattered forever. It was damaged, and it would leave a scar. We knelt there, on the sidewalk of a nameless street, a mother and daughter clinging to each other for what felt like an eternity. When Claire's sobs finally subsided into quiet, hiccuping whimpers, I spoke softly, my voice a whisper next to her ear. "It's going to be okay, my love. We're going to get through this together." She lifted her head, her beautiful face now streaked with tears and flushed red. She looked at me, her blue eyes filled with disbelief. How can you forgive me?" I reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek. "Because I'm your mother," I said, the simplest answer, but it held all the truth. "And because the real legacy isn't in our blood, it's right here, in this moment." Looking at my daughter in my arms, I realized it was true. The legacy wasn't some genetic mutation, some secret from the past. The legacy was love. It was the ability to see the brokenness in another person and choose to stay and help them heal. It was the moment when, faced with our own ends, we realized the only thing worth holding on to in this world was each other. The road ahead would be long and difficult. We would have to face the police, answer questions, and maybe even deal with the fallout from people like Julian Finch. The wound Claire had inflicted on us both wouldn't heal overnight. But as I helped her to her feet, as we leaned on each other and made our way back to the car, I knew we would face it all together. And maybe forgiveness, that simple but extraordinary miracle, would be the greatest regenerative serum of all. It wouldn't heal the past, but it would give us the strength to build a new future from the ashes of today. 6 months have passed. The Portland autumn gave way to a damp winter, and now, the first hints of spring are stirring. I'm sitting on the balcony of the small apartment we moved into, a warm mug of tea in my hands, its heat seeping through the ceramic. We had to sell the house. It was a painful decision, like amputating a part of your own memory. But with the sadness came a strange sense of release. That house, with its stacks of bills and the ghost of desperation, had become a prison. Now, we were free. A poorer, humbler freedom, but a real one. I often think back on that day, not with the same terror as before, but with the quiet perspective of someone who has walked through the eye of the storm and come out the other side. The story of the villains has an ending. Aethelred Genomics was exposed. It turns out Mr. Henderson hadn't just called the local police. My quiet neighbor, it seems, was a former agent for a defunct federal agency, and Michael had called in one last favor on his deathbed. He had sent all the evidence Michael had secretly gathered over the years on Project Cassandra to his old contacts. The police raid was just the beginning. A few days later, federal agents sealed the entire building. Julian Finch was arrested, not for kidnapping, but for a long list of charges related to illegal human experimentation and conspiracies against national security. He will never see the light of day again. The legacy he tried to complete became the tombstone for his own life. And Mr. Henderson, our hero, was injured in the struggle with Julian, but he survived. His promise to Michael was fulfilled. He still calls me sometimes, just to ask how my new garden is doing. We never speak of that day, but in the quiet understanding between two old friends, we both know. And we, mother and daughter, became witnesses. Claire, with a bravery I had never seen in her, told the entire story, hiding no detail of her own role, her desperation, her deceit. Her tearful confession became the most powerful evidence against Julian. They saw us as victims, and legally, we were cleared. But there is no court that can erase the scars on the soul. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about the evil of men, but about the fragility of goodness when it's pushed to the brink. I saw my own daughter, a good person who loved her mother, become so poisoned by desperation that she turned love into a tool and life into a commodity. My philosophy is simpler now. None of us is an island. We are connected by invisible threads of responsibility and love, and when one of us starts to sink, they can pull down everyone they hold dear. True wealth isn't how much you have in the bank, but how much strength you have to not let go of your loved ones when they are at their weakest. Legacy, I realized, isn't something encoded in your DNA for others to harvest. My legacy isn't the special blood in my veins. My legacy was the forgiveness I gave Claire on the day she knelt on that sidewalk. My legacy is the hug after the storm, the ability to look at the person who hurt you most deeply and still say, "It's going to be okay." My legacy is not something to be taken, but something to be given. The balcony door slides open, and Claire walks out, holding a small watering can. She sets it down next to the azalea pot I've been tending to. Her hair has grown a little longer, and in her eyes, though there's still a distant sadness, there's also light again. The silence between us now is no longer one of tension or guilt. It's a comfortable, quiet, the kind shared by two people who have been to hell and back together and don't need words to describe it. "The buds are about to open, Mom," she says softly, her finger gently touching a small, emerging blossom. I smile. I see that. It was a long winter, but no winter lasts forever. She looks at me, and in that gaze, I see it all. The gratitude, the remorse, and a love that has been tested by fire and has become stronger for it. She doesn't say, "I'm sorry" anymore. She doesn't have to. Instead, she lives her apology every day, in small actions. The cup of tea she brings me each morning, the way she patiently listens to my stories, the way she helps me tend to these little pots on our balcony. This is our healing. Not in a fancy therapist's office, but here, on a small balcony, among the plants waiting to bloom. We are cultivating our garden again, not the one in our old backyard, but the garden of our relationship. We know there will be scars, patches of barren ground where painful memories will never fade. But we also know that as long as we have each other, we can always plant new seeds and wait, with all the patience and love in the world, for a new spring to begin. Thank you for listening to my story. If it connected with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it. And please, leave a comment below with your thoughts, or perhaps a story of your own. Let's keep the empathy and the conversation going.